Blessings in Jesus' name. So very simply in this video, I'm just going to expose 3 very serious crimes being currently committed in Ireland. These crimes are at the highest level. They're at the highest administrative and constitutional preserving offices. Now, the President of Ireland is the custodian of the Constitution. What that means is he's supposed to prevent anything getting into legislation which fights against the Constitution. So I could go on and spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but I'm going to make it very simple for people who aren't really versed in the terminology. Firstly, the President is claiming that there's legislation in existence that tells him he doesn't have to test bills for their lawfulness prior to adding them to the legislature. Did you get that? It's basically like telling a painter he doesn't have to paint the wall. The President is the custodian of the Constitution. He's supposed to prevent anything unlawful getting into the legislation. But he's saying that there's legislation in existence that tells him he doesn't have to preserve the legislation. So how did that legislation get into existence to tell him he doesn't do his job? It didn't come through the people, it wasn't voted in. It was squiggle of a pen behind people's backs. That's what that was. Number 2, second corruption. The President claims that he's not accountable to the laws of Ireland if found in misconduct in his office. That the courts of Ireland can't hold him accountable to misconduct. So is he above the offence of treason? Because his office is pivotal. So why would you make the most pivotal office above the law and above apprehension and above accountability? Doesn't make sense. You simply don't have the authority of the law if you don't submit to it. You must submit to the power you wield as a man. But they're claiming that the President is above the law, in effect. Now, you might get a speeding ticket if he speeds, but if he's not accountable in his office to the role that he's supposed to perform, he's a dictator, not a president. Number 3, after all of that, after the President has failed to do his job by testing bills for their lawfulness, their constitutionality in other words, after the President has admitted that he's not accountable, according to the legislature, to the courts of Ireland, they're now telling you from the Court of Appeal that legislation can be presumed lawful indefinitely instead of the court testing the legislations when they've been tasked with doing so. So, very simple 3 points. The President claims he doesn't have to do his job by testing the constitutionality of legislature. 2, he claims he's not accountable to the courts if he's found in misconduct in his office. Number 3, the courts of appeal, the highest court of appeal in our land, are claiming that legislation can be considered by the court as presumptively constitutional and must be considered by the Irish people as presumptively constitutional, even though their task is to remove ambiguity as to whether something is or isn't lawful and enforce the law. So they can't be doing both, can they? They can't be doing both of those tasks. So this is ridiculous. This is unwise conduct. This is mad stuff. This is an attempt, a militarised and mobilised attempt at sedition in Ireland through the governing bodies by legislating things behind the Irish people's backs which separate the government from the accountability of the people and tells them they don't have to preserve the Constitution that the Irish people have given them to uphold, to act as custodian of, and to implement. And that when they fail to do so, there's no accountability. But you must presume that what they've written down is the law and act upon it and towards it as though it were the law. That's treason. That's the highest level of sedition. And it's exposed. Sedition is going on in Ireland. Rogue governments, imposters, occupying militarised forces by the pen are misrepresenting the laws of Ireland in the legislation and failing to represent the Irish people via the Constitution and its implementation and upholding. So they're not doing it. They're not doing the job we pay them to do. They're effectively fighting against us, and they're legislating so that they can basically appear to be blameless in their crime. But we haven't okayed their legislations. So they're committing serious, serious treason, serious, serious sedition. And most of it's occurring through the seat of President. And then the courts are backing them up, and have done, by saying something can be favourably claimed to be presumptively constitutional. Instead of testing the constitutionality of it, they would favour to continue on presuming it's constitutional. And that's mindless. That's utter stupidity. Nobody would do that in their right mind. It's folly. Especially when the Court of Appeal were judicially reviewing at that time a High Court decision to abandon the testing of the constitutionality of sections brought before it. The Court of Appeal also failed to test the constitutionality of them, but told us that we must presume they're constitutional. Now, why would two courts elect not to test the constitutionality of them when they were tasked with doing so, but favour presuming them constitutional instead, and commanding the Irish people to do so also indefinitely? That's clearly a deliberate distraction and decoy to bring the attention away from the sections themselves, but to get people to comply with them as though they were lawful. This is treason and sedition at the highest level in Ireland, in our land, and I've exposed it. They're legislating things behind our backs, so that when we do go about holding them accountable, they claim that we can't. I call sedition, guys. I call treason. These men can be tried under the Treason Act in Ireland. Section 1 of the Treason Act, minimum of 40 years in prison. But that's if you can round them up, because they're claiming that you can't. Because they claim they don't submit to the courts of Ireland. Well, whose president is Michael D. Higgins if he doesn't submit to the Irish courts? Blessings in Jesus' name.